Hey everyone, welcome back to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I am really glad to be here with you. I have a return guest today, Dr. Linda McGhee. She's a clinical psychologist and nationally recognized moderator, mental health expert, and speaker. She was recently elected as APA president of the Assessment Psychology section of Division 12, the Society of Clinical Psychology. She was a past president of the Maryland Psychological Association. Dr. McGhee is one of the nation's foremost experts on culturally sensitive testing and assessment for diverse populations. She currently teaches assessment and diversity at George Washington University's Forensic Psychology program and is visiting faculty with the GWU PsyD program. Linda is back. Linda's been on the podcast a few times before, and I am thrilled to have her back, as always. We have great conversations. She's an amazing person and always up to something meaningful. So we talk about lots of things. She recently launched the Multicultural Psychologist podcast. So we talk about why she felt compelled to do that, to create a space for honest conversations about culture and identity and assessment. We talk about the joys and challenges of podcasting, her mission to help other clinicians break down systemic barriers, and her vision for supporting the next generation through lending libraries and scholarships and so forth. So, as always, there is a lot to take away from this conversation. Linda's a dynamic and engaging individual and is doing incredibly important work. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Linda McGhee. Linda, hey, welcome back.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm happy to be here.
Good, good. Yeah, it's so good to see you again. It's been a little while since we've done anything like this, but
Yes, and many things have changed in the world since last we spoke.
that is for sure. Yeah. Things changing in the world, things changing in our lives. This is
Uh-huh.
why I got to catch up with you every year or two because you've always got things going on. So maybe we start. Tell folks what you've been up to recently and what's changing in your life, at least.
Well, I think that the last time I was on your podcast, I was promoting the Multicultural Assessment Conference, which we did 2 virtual
Mm-hmm.
trainings on.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to segue into a podcast, and I made the decision to do so. Now, when I made the decision to do a multicultural psychologist podcast, this was before all the political changes, and I had this in my mind for years. It just happened to coincide, the premiere just happened to coincide with a lot of changes in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but it made me realize that I needed to do it. Right? And I needed to talk about these issues because they remain issues with our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremy, you know this because I presented at some of your conferences. The
Mm-hmm.
demographic of America is continuing to change at a very, very rapid rate. And one of the things that I have discovered through going out and speaking and training is that people don't necessarily know that. Right? And even people within our field don't know that, right?
Fascinating.
So,
Yes.
and with all of those changes comes nuance. And in a world where everybody wants to talk about things in bumper stickers, so everybody wants a sound bite. But when a clinician walks into a room or a tester walks into the room and they're across from someone, they're not a sound bite. Right? And they're also not necessarily what they appear. You don't see the totality of them. You don't see who they're married to. You don't see who they're parenting. You don't see a lot of aspects of their culture because you're just looking at the person that's across from you and you're making value judgments based on, how much melanin they have in their skin, what's their native language, do they have accent in English, do they appear to be cisgendered,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't know a lot. And we're also not geared toward talking about it. So I don't know if you remember this, Jeremy, but I had this slide about how many people are admitting to be in the LGBTQ culture.
Mm.
And it started off with the age even beyond the boomers, which I can't even think of what they're called at this exact moment. But they were the least likely to claim LGBTQ status. And then up to this present generation of Z and alphas who 25% are saying that they have some relationship identity wise to the LGBTQ community. And so when you look at that chart, you might think, oh, well, they're just more likely to say it. But that doesn't necessarily, just because they're more likely to say it doesn't mean that older generations don't have those factors. They're just less willing to say it. So when I use that as an example of nuance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because only 2% of baby boomers are willing to say that they're LGBTQ doesn't mean that they actually aren't, right?
Sure.
And so what made me do this was we're still ethically bound to treat humans in the best way and to test and assess humans in the best way possible to the highest ethical standards congruent to their culture. Again, I use a lot of research. So
Mm-hmm.
this is just not about my feelings. I tell everybody in God we trust, but everybody else has to bring data.
Yeah.
And so my data, my and my podcasts are rooted in research, okay, or significant experience of someone who's been in the industry 40 years. And then also, like, again, the demographics suggest that we need to stay on this and we need to find ways to talk about this. And I wanted to create a safe space where people could listen, and now they can listen and get see. But just if you're interested in something, there's no pressure. You can click on the Marilyn Montero talk. You could click on the talk about EAAE. You can click on, I just did one about maternal health and perinatal mental health.
Mm-hmm.
You can click on it and you can listen and you can share it with your students and you can share it with your practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be like a huge training in order to do that. And I
Right.
wanted to create a space where people felt like they could learn safely.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I did the podcast because clinicians are telling me they really need this information.
Yeah.
That we still are not getting it from our training program. We're getting out there and we're feeling like, okay, like I don't know anything about this, right? But the person walks in your door.
Right. Right. Well, and if it's anything like my training, it's very theoretical. Like we may have,
Mhm,
there's a class maybe, or
mhm.
maybe you do a little like weekend, one day workshop or something. But to actually hear people talk about the practical experience, I think is huge.
Right, right. And even the theory and even to talk about the didactics of diversity, I think that there's still like I had one class
Hmm.
when I was in a PsyD program and at GW where I teach and now, but I teach a three-year sequence there, right? That starts
Sounds
off
more
with,
like it.
a thoughtful, where are you? Where are you as an individual?
Hmm.
Then where's the client centered? And then what is
Hmm.
the interaction between you and the client in the room?
Hmm.
A thoughtful sort of going through differences. So but I do understand even now people are getting basic training, like we have all
Hmm.
now have gotten. We've all gone to unconscious bias training, but we don't really go beyond that. And we're struggling. And we don't want to say, no one wants to come to you, Jeremy, and say, I don't know what to do with this person. Or I think I said the wrong thing. Can you help me?
Right. Right.
Or this
That's
person
why.
didn't show up after the first visit and I don't know
Hmm.
why.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I mean, to your point about podcasts and people just being able to click, that's one of the
Uh-huh.
things I love about podcasts is that you can learn in a safe environment. Nobody knows what you're clicking on or what you're listening to. And I think that's especially important in this multicultural realm because, as you know, we've talked about people are scared, myself
Hmm.
included,
Hmm.
to
We all.
seem dumb and to ask questions that are silly or offensive. It's
Hmm.
it's a it's a fraught realm for a lot of folks, and you don't want
Right.
to seem like you don't know what you're talking about. And so to have a podcast is fantastic.
We don't want to make mistakes.
Hmm.
we don't want people to accuse us of being some ist, racist,
Mhm.
sexist,
Mhm.
homophobic. And we avoid, as humans, we avoid discomfort,
Yeah, of
right? And in
course.
this country, a lot of these issues are uncomfortable. They're
Sure.
uncomfortable to tell your professor in a class, or even, to go tell your boss. Like I always joke with my students. It's like, I know that I should tell you to go to your supervisor and you should go to your supervisor, but a lot of times I didn't go to my supervisor because my supervisor was grading me.
Mhm.
And so,
There's a lot of
while
vulnerability.
I want to make it clear, I want everybody to go to their supervisors, but I do understand why people are reticent to do
Mhm.
so. But when you're in a room with you or you're out walking, you can listen to this podcast. And, I do it myself. I was on
Mhm.
one yesterday about intersectionality, and it was just wonderful hearing from the experts and people who have spent their life's work doing this. And for me, interviewing them, and I know the same for you, even though we're both busy, the podcasting is a labor of love. It
Mhm.
really is. It's like, you feel like that you are doing something. And, I feel like I'm talking about diversity in the storm right now.
It's a good way
And
to put it. There's a there's a big storm happening
yeah,
right.
and
Yeah, for a
to
while.
continue to talk about it, but it's challenging. I will not
Mhm.
say otherwise.
Yeah, I wanna hear about your experience with the podcast and just, what you're loving about it so far,
Mhm.
what's challenging about it so far.
Okay, so normally I would give you this answer that would be like a highly intelligent answer
Yeah.
and, basically research based, but I'm just going to say from the moment I hit record on the first podcast, it has just been kismet. It has just been very comfortable. I've been very happy with the caliber of people that have said yes, and
Mhm.
I'm coming for you, Jeremy. Don't worry.
I'm here whenever. Yeah.
And people are just really receptive to it
Mhm.
and happy that I didn't stop talking or
Mhm.
didn't try to, kept the dialogue going.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that.
And, a lot of people want to continue to learn, but they don't necessarily want to put themselves out publicly. And so the
Mhm.
podcast is a way for people like you and me, or you and I, to continue to keep the dialogue going among professionals, all of which are trying to be better clinicians, better assessors and diagnosticians, and to meet the needs of their clients. And this training and better business people. Being good at diversity, yeah, it is good for business.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you wanna be a place that people can feel safe to come, and, that gets around. It is a business component too.
Right. So it's nice because people want to come on and talk about their life's work,
Mm.
right? And
Mhm.
get get credit for doing a lot of work that a lot of times is largely unseen, open and subject to attack. People are doing this work at great costs. Career wise, and I meet a lot of brilliant people that could be doing a lot of different things,
Right.
so it's good to give them flowers while they can smell them. That's an old African American expression.
Mhm.
Give them their flowers where they can still smell them.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to do that and to commend them and just to sort of immerse myself and the joy at which the guests are talking about their life's work is has been something that I didn't anticipate.
That's so cool. Yeah, yeah, you make a good point, like, just to give people a stage where they can light up a little bit, is there's that's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and it's really cool. I mean, especially in our field, like you said, people, like, toil in obscurity a lot,
Mhm.
like, we live in these very small sort of silos or whatever, and maybe you publish some articles and, like, 72 people read them or something, but, like, getting on a podcast, like, "Oh, now I've got 1,000 people who are hearing this, or
Right.
2,000 people, or however much, maybe more," and
Or
that's a
that
really
person that says that listening to this podcast changed my life.
Mhm.
Or made me know that I was going in the right direction when I was facing a lot of critique about my dissertation or my major area paper
Mhm.
or the kind of people that I wanted to see. Yeah, I mean, and I want to take this time, and I don't want you to edit this out, Jeremy, but I want to see, I wanted to take the time publicly to say thank you to you for giving me my podcast start in this field and where the assessment people are few and far between. You talk about toiling in obscurity. Us assessment people are basically the minority of the majority.
Mm.
And then clinicians of color in assessment are like way down in the small percentages. If the number of African American psychologists is 4%, the number of assessment people into assessment, particularly in assessment in the way that I am,
Right.
is very small percentages. So I want to thank you for giving me the platform. Thank you for like being a very silent ally sometimes by having me on the show, by helping me establish myself in this field, and to always be encouraging when I come up with my schemes of things that I want to do, and allow me to use the testing psychologist to promote them. I just want to say that publicly because we're always in the age of like criticizing people and saying people aren't doing enough. But I want to thank you for doing what you're doing in your own little quiet way.
Well, that means a lot. Yeah, I'm very tempted to just end the interview now and run and hide and edit all this. But no, that really does mean a lot, and I'm super grateful. I mean, it goes both ways, right? Just super grateful that we overlapped and somehow got connected. I can't remember how that
I
happened, but
can't
it's been,
either.
yeah. I mean, you're a force, and I'm just lucky to kind of be in your
Thank
world.
you.
So,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
hmm,
I
yeah.
want I wanted to just go back to you asked me about the podcast and I kind of spoke about it globally. But, already, I had someone come up to me with the narrative of the autism story with which was my show with Marilyn
Mm,
Montero, the creator of The Bigness too. I've had so many people come up that are parents on the spectrum, that are clinicians working in the spectrum and diagnosing the spectrum to just say, how much clarity she brought to their journeys and giving things names and understanding that in her heart, she wants each and every person that she sees and diagnoses to be seen as an individual, not a cookie
mm,
cutter diagnosis. Right. And
hmm,
how we have to develop each and every client's story and to best help them and their families rear and raise and nurture people that fall on the autism spectrum. And just that one so far and the show on the EPPP that just came out
hmm.
is really garnered a lot of attention.
Nice.
And hopefully, again, we start off with Jeremy Wright, who's like Mr. Assessment. And he's just so, I mean, he has more energy than me. And that is actually saying something. But he was a perfect kickoff to talk about all the ways that we need to continue to think, not just about treatment, but how I wanted the podcast to be the intersection of psychology and culture, regardless of whether it's training, treatment. Of course, every aspect of every show has something about assessment because that's where I live and that's where I love. And so to just be the intersection and then not necessarily limited. So that's why I'm interested in training. I think I mentioned to you on one of our calls that I've just been appointed to this task force that has to do with the APA task force on the EPPP. So I'm definitely interested in how we're not
That's
just the
huge.
EPPP, but how we have a supply of psychologists that remains pretty steady and not nearly enough to meet the needs of the general public.
Hmm.
And how we treat the supply that we're putting out, how we pay them, so there are a lot of fences and a lot of gates. And then we have people just as soon as they're getting in, they're leaving because of burnout. So that'll be my next appearance, hopefully on your podcast. Is I'm going to write, hopefully a book about
Okay.
that. So I to have the people from the EPPP on who have been struggling with EPPP was really something that I really wanted to focus on.
Yeah. Okay. So you've said enough about this EPPP episode that I'm pretty interested. I want to people go listen to it for sure. I don't want to like take all the wind out of the
Mhm.
sails. Can you just say like 15 to 30 more seconds about what this EPPP episode is? I looked at the title and yeah, just to pique people's interest a little more.
So there are a couple of things. One is, in response to the ASPPB bringing out the EPPP2, there
Mm-hmm.
was quite a bit of uproar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of states have adopted it already. But the testing itself, both the EPPP and the EPPP2, have been the subject of a lot of scrutiny. And the pass rates are, even if you don't look at race, the pass rates are not traditionally the highest when you
Okay.
look at all regulated professions, right?
Interesting.
And the history of regulation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
licensing, which a lot of times came after the advent of civil rights. So licensing generally did not occur in this country until the Civil Rights Act was passed. And it was used, like, for example, you and I were just talking about South Carolina. South Carolina didn't license lawyers until after the Civil Rights Act passed, when women and minorities started to enter into the field, right? So, and also, this is a nuanced point, but psychology was trying to solidify itself as a science, as a
Mm-hmm.
legitimate science. And
Mm-hmm.
this testing came along to sort of help legitimize them, right? And so, again, we're looking at all these factors that don't necessarily have to do with competency and
Mm-hmm.
and safety of the public. But
Mm-hmm.
when you look at race, the pass rate in the studies that have been done suggests that there are some racial differences. And I wanted to highlight those people in terms of their humanity, right? And what we're losing when people can't pass a test so they can never practice without supervision. And some states in Canada have a limit on how many times you can take them. Right, so
Okay.
you literally, in Canada, I think they just up until recently had it where you couldn't take them. And so now, to sort of close the loop, they are telling their stories, their economic, their emotional, their traumatic responses to this. But now the states are facing unprecedented demand, right? And so already in other fields, there has been a push to, like, relax licensing. Like the state
Mm,
of Illinois, I think waived some of the social work licensing guidelines, and then there
okay.
were states like Texas that were considering, if you got within a certain percentage of passing, that you could add supervision. So there's always been these kinds of things as sort of common sense ways of sort of making up for the fact that people can't pass this exam. But the latest shot over the bow has been Texas deciding to scrap the EPPP and come up with its own testing
Ooh, I did not
mechanism.
hear about that.
Yes. And Louisiana is thinking about it, and I think their meeting is next week.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, I am holding my Potter. I'm trying to stay neutral. I'm trying to stay where the research shows us.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
will tell you this, my perspective and my presentations to the APA board of directors on this issue center around the fact that I come from a licensed field, law,
Sure. Sure.
and the requirements for psychology were steeper. So, for example, we have to take comprehensives
Mm-hmm.
exams in psychology, right? So we take classes, we have to do finals, we have a major area paper or dissertation, and we have comprehensives. A lot of states still require post degree hours.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I was a part of the move to help Maryland get rid of some of those, right? But even when I was not in any kind of position of power, I just wrote them a letter like, "I don't understand this." Right? Why would you guys not be with the psychologists? Why would you make it harder and make me have another year where I'm not earning money?
Mhm.
because I can't get a job because I'm not licensed.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's how I came to this point. When you look at the pay, the average salary, not beginning salary, the average salary in psychology is $65,000 a year.
That seems crazy.
Yeah.
That's very low.
It is, in fact, according to the APA, it is, in fact, the actual opening salary. I mean, the actual average salary. And so the average opening salary is even less, beginning salary is even less than that. So I'm looking at what you get out of it, the money, people having a hard time. You and I were talking about business slightly right before, where I'm having, we're in the DC area. Things are slowing down here because layoffs to the feds, and people are struggling with insurance. The ones that take insurance, and they're struggling with private pay. And
That's what I
they're
hear
in
across the country.
organization. Yes, I see it, right? I see it.
Mhm.
I have never had a testing lull
Mm.
until recently, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and I've been in this field since '05. Okay.
I'm hearing that from a lot of people, that same story.
Yeah.
Just, I've been doing this forever. I've never had to market, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden, the phone is not ringing.
My
What do I
best
do?
buddy and we had a conversation last week, and she went to GW with me. We shared office space up until recently.
Mm.
And she and I had this discussion about, wow, you know? So, and I've seen it on your community pages.
Mhm.
People are having the same issues.
Yes.
And given that we're probably one of the bigger ticket price items in psychology,
Mhm.
it doesn't I'm not surprised.
Right.
So most psychologists I know work really, really hard for what money they do earn.
Mhm. That's
And
true.
so I, so what I'm looking at is twofold. Is one is, how can we make way for people to be in this field with us? How
Right.
can we start looking at basic equity
Yeah.
in terms of our field? You should not have to take a vow of poverty to be a psychologist.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
You remember when you did that talk about money
Yeah,
and
yeah.
guilt when at our conference? It's just like it solidified everything that had been going on in my head. So every time I see somebody say, "Well, why don't you take insurance?" or "Why don't you do that?" I'm like, I do not have to take a vow of poverty to be a psychologist. I don't know where that came in from.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, it's baked into it, right? I mean, we barely get paid as grad students, and then we go on internship, and at least for me, I made $24,000 on internship.
I
Got a
made 26.
26. Okay. So then I get a huge increase for postdoc up to 29,000.
Mhm.
That's sarcastic, by the way. And then, we come out of postdoc and it's like, okay, so now I'm supposed to start a practice or take a job or whatever and make, well, maybe 65, maybe
Yeah.
more. How does that
Yeah.
even work?
But, if you're making more, hey, great. But average wise, people are seeing a lot of clients. They're having to do a
Yeah,
lot of testing to make not so much money.
that's
And
very,
also, it's hard to get into. So what I'm trying to say to you is not just that the salary is low. That's not the discussion. Is you can't even really break into the field
yeah.
because of the fencers and barriers. And that is one of the reasons why I started the Multicultural Psychologist was to start a podcast. But in the second and third iterations of what I want to do, one of them is to start a lending library.
Oh,
And I'll be on your Facebook page soon, because I'm going to start collecting materials to be for young clinicians who have supervision or who have been trained in assessment, to be able to be in a lending library for 2 years where they can borrow assessment equipment without expending, like, I think the new iteration of the waste is like, you know, it's,
a
$1,800 or
lot.
something.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money and people just don't have it. So that's one of the things that I want to do, is to start a lending library in the DMV. I'm going to start in the DMV. Hopefully one of these universities or people that I affiliate with will help me.
Hmm.
And the second thing I want to do is to look at bringing down the costs of assessments for, like raising funds to have low cost assessments. And finally, to start to look into like, if you want to join, like you have this crafted practice group, I want to do some certifications in terms of culture.
Oh.
So people can listen to podcasts, they can listen to speakers, they can join discussion groups, and then at the end of that time, they will get a certification. So those are
Mm,
things that I have going on. Of course, not busy at all and not ambitious at all.
mm-mm, mm-mm.
But those are some of the ways that I want to give to this profession, which has given me so much.
Hmm.
You know,
I love that.
I was a practicing attorney
Mhm.
and I wasn't happy. And I would be happiest if part of my day would when I would go volunteer. And fortunately, I am married to a phenomenal human being. And he was like, "Well, why don't you go do what you want to do?"
Uh-huh.
So someone who would willingly give up, I'm not even going to talk about the money from banking law over to psychology. You didn't
Mm.
want to talk about the 65, you know, is a factor. Let's just put it that way.
A little bit of a pay cut to make that switch.
But I'm where I, I'm just alive in psychology. I want
That's why I
to,
love
huh?
chatting with you. I just want to highlight that, like, that phrase alive in psychology. That's so good. But that's why I love these conversations is that you go for the things that you want to do. I think it's just a good model. I mean, for anybody listening out there, you made a huge career switch. And then just since I've known you within psychology, you do these different things, like you have a practice and then you teach and now you're doing the podcast and you're writing the books and, you did a conference. It's like you're a good model for like pursuing what brings you joy and what feels fulfilling.
Well, I hit a certain age and it was like, "Hey, what are you holding back for?" And then,
Mm,
I'm gonna be serious for a second, but it's not like sad. I have wonderful parents. I'm just gonna say that. And they both passed in the last 5 years. But when people write to me, they talk about all the help that they gave to people. And Jeremy, my parents didn't have any, they didn't have formal education. And they like, people were coming to me, "Your mom helped me when I had this issue, and she wrote a letter for me, and your dad helped to get me a suit when I was in trouble and I needed to go to court." And, he helped to raise money to pay off his church. And then I kept thinking to myself, what a wonderful tribute, first of all. And then
sure.
second of all, if they could do that with no resources,
Right. What
then
can I
what
do?
could I do with every resource, with the Jeremy Sharps and people behind me? I could just reach for everything, right?
Well said. Yeah.
What can I do with all the resources that I have and all the people out there that care about
Mm,
making this field a little bit better? There are so many people out there, even the ones that have no clue about how to do it. They know that we need to stay vigilant.
sure. Well, that community is a huge part of it too. I hear
Mhm,
that so often. Just getting in these groups, psychologists get together, just not feeling isolated, feeling like there are people who believe in you, people
mhm.
are going to hold you accountable,
Right.
who can lift you up. I think we all
And
need,
the field is really, it can be isolating.
for sure,
And particularly
for
like
sure.
solo practitioners, it's very isolating. You only see people 3 times, 2 or 3 times in the testing environment. It
Hmm.
can be isolating. So to have,
Definitely.
I'm in a group now that I was just telling you that I listened to someone who yesterday who was encouraging people to bring people along, to continue
Hmm.
to work. And she also said that, when if she knew if she could give her young self advice, what advice would she give? And she said to rest. And that's something that I have really taken to heart the last couple of years, is
Okay.
that I wanted to do this podcast a couple of years ago, but my body was like, "You need to rest. You need to go
Hmm.
find your place at the beach. You need to go, put your feet in sand." And so I mix now what I'm doing, even though it sounds like a lot, I space it out. And if it doesn't get done in the 3 months that I wanna do it, then it'll get done in the next 3 months. You just have to let yourself rest, particularly doing the kinds of really serious trainings that I do.
Mhm.
I have to take
Mhm.
care of myself psychologically, and as clinicians, we need to all really have defined paths of self-care.
Do you think that's possible for folks who are just starting out? I mean, because that sounds great. That
Mhm,
sounds amazing, right? Like, I like to rest here and there sometimes too,
mhm.
But we're at places, just transparent. I think we're both at places in our lives where like we've had some amount of success and like that buys a little time and buffer and whatever. Do you think about how can people do that if they're just starting out? Should they try to do that? How does that
Well,
work?
I think their survival is based on them trying to figure out some ways.
Mm,
And even given what we've said so far in this podcast about them having to hustle to make any money, I mean,
hmm.
we're just seeing it everywhere. But the amount of work that young clinicians have to do in order to pay rent, like I'm in the DMV, I have a 25-year-old child, and the rent in this
25-year-old
area,
child. Yeah.
right? Yeah, if you can see him, he's tall as my roof. But he the rent is $1,800 here
Yeah.
for a basic one bedroom, and it's pretty much like that in a lot of parts of the country. And so, like, how can I say to you that a clinician has to find self care when you have to work? Sometimes they're seeing 25 people. Sometimes they're having to do a testing or two a week.
Hmm.
There's not much room to rest. But then I'm seeing it in terms of burnout. Right? I'm seeing people saying that they're not staying in the field, people not joining committees, not becoming a part of anything, not because they can't afford it, and then they're burnt out, right? So, like, all these state associations and all of these things that we rely on, we're relying on people who are aging, getting very elderly in terms of their service, and that we can't replace them, right?
Right.
So it I saying this advisedly, but I'm still saying that people need to find ways to take care of themselves. And I want to say this, the younger generation have more self-care built in terms of what's going on in their head
Mm.
than our generations. It's been talked about while they were growing up as a part of their well-being, and sometimes we even joke about it as bosses.
Hmm. Sure.
Oh, it's like, oh my God,
That younger generation.
yeah,
Yeah.
that they're like they're gonna tell you, "Look, you know, that's all I can do,"
Mhm.
and they're gonna push to be compensated for it. And so
Mhm.
there's many parts of me that are like, I commend that, but I still think that if every person who has in their bailiwick treating, assessing, diagnosing, consulting, training in the area of mental health, there has to be ways that you're taking care of yourself so that you can be the best that you can be, so that you're bringing the appropriate balance into the treatment room. And
Mhm.
so, like, I think a lot of areas where people sort of run afoul of ethics is when they're not balanced, when they're not taking
Mm.
care of themselves. And so they're using inappropriate forms of self-care, and that shows up in the treatment room
Mm.
or in the
That's a good
assessment
point.
room.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
And
true.
and with regard to culture, a lot of times they just have not been exposed to training. They're like very set in their own minds about what is and what isn't. Lack of exposure. So sometimes when people say something to me that I find to be aggressive in terms of culture, I really look at them and I sometimes think they just haven't had the exposure they just have no idea
That's a
that,
kind attribution.
yeah.
I like that.
And I'm being kind deliberately because I want people that are listening to this to understand that
Mhm.
you can cure ignorance.
Hmm.
You can learn more. Now, whether you want to apply it and whether you want to change, that's a whole different other thing. The reason why you say that, as a kind attribution is a lot of people don't want to,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But
True, that's the next step.
yeah, I go back to the original point that I came on with is the demographic is changing. The models that we rely upon to make money are dependent upon our services meeting the market.
Right. Right. Yeah, so that's important. Maybe we talk about that just for a
Mhm,
second. I mean, you said the demographics are changing. I think a lot of us are maybe aware of that
mhm.
in at least a vague sense. But let's put some
Numbers on it?
numbers to that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our nation is becoming more quote unquote multicultural, right? And what does that actually mean and how does that impact us?
Well, for one thing, now half the children that are under the age of 5 are not white, more than half.
Hmm.
For the first time, I think in US history, the number of actual numbers of white people went down one year. The last year that so there were actually less numbers, right? So that means less of a birth rate, more of a death rate.
Absolute numbers. We're not
Yeah,
like
uh-huh,
not percentage of the
absolute
population.
numbers, right? There were actually less white people the last year that they did. I can't remember the year. Um, we're like, again, what I said before, we're getting married later,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We are questioning admitting that we're wrestling with gender, sexuality, all of those things that normally weren't talked about, right? Are talked about now and are questioned right now. And if you just look at your school children, for those of you who have younger children, think about who they're playing with, who they're coming home, what they're coming home and telling you. It's a completely different dynamic. And what I hear from psychologists is, I don't want to do that. I'm not using pronouns. I'm not doing any of that. And I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I actually hear this from people. So
Oh
one
yeah.
one one psychologist that I know and respect was like, "I'm gonna have to retire because I'm not doing any of this." So women are out, are getting more, have surpassed men in terms of degrees. So we truly are a changing demographic. More people are saying that they're multiracial,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
More than one race,
Sure.
right? We have majority minority states. I think there's 6 of them now. I was just in Texas doing training with the school psychologists in Texas, and they're in a state where it's, their school children break down to mostly Hispanic and Latino majority
Yeah.
in this particular school district. So, I mean, we are changing, and a lot of people don't know it, but in our minds, because we all have this unconscious bias, we sort of even overplay the other. So if you ask people the percentage of Jews in this country, the percentage of Muslims in this country, people will tell you like nearly 30% of each group, right?
Okay.
Which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the numbers of Jews in this country is 3%.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, just for me, that does seem like fewer than I would
Yeah,
expect.
exactly.
Yeah.
So in our minds, we don't have information. So one of the things that I discovered since I started doing the podcast, Jeremy, is that I need to talk more about that. So, in addition to these guests, which are a lot geared toward mental health professionals, although anyone can listen, and I've had a lot of people say that they understood perfectly what was going on.
Hmm.
But in addition to that, I'm forcing myself to get on social media
Hmm.
to start talking about these granular changes that people can understand because people just don't have information. They're getting their information from more and more social media, more and more not credible sources, more and more polarized sourcing, right? And more echo chamber where everyone feels the same exact way.
Right.
And they
Right.
just don't have facts. And sometimes when I see people say something online, I know that they think it's the truth. And
Absolutely. We
it's
see that a
not an
lot.
opinion, right? The number of Jews in this country is a number. It's not an opinion.
It's not an opinion. Correct.
So I want to start giving information about those kinds of things.
I love that. Yeah. I have. an observation and a question around
Huh?
that, just to like drive that point home. I was talking to someone, we had friends in town the other day, and they were making a comment, not to call out the older
Mhm.
generation. I know this, this is happening all over the place, but they were saying that a lot of folks in maybe the boomer generation, grew up with this idea that you could trust the news, like the news was legit.
Mhm.
But that has shifted a lot over
Mhm.
the years, where news is now entertainment, but maybe for a lot of folks in this particular generation, there's still that holdover of, no, the news is the news,
Mhm.
even though it's not, and so that kind of
Mhm.
contribute. That was an interesting observation for me.
Yep.
My question is, and you kind of hit on it with social media. The minute you said, "Oh, I'm doing social media," I thought, okay, how are you kind of like combating that echo chamber phenomenon? Like, are you aware of that? Are you like doing it on purpose to like spread
Well,
it to different places? Like, how do we tackle that? I wrestle with that too.
truth is not a shield against misinformation, right? This is what I have discovered, and this is one of the areas that I personally am studying. And if there's anyone out there who's listening that's a misinformation, disinformation expert, please, please, please call me. Maybe Jeremy and I could do a joint show or something like that on that. But
Oh my god.
you do not combat disinformation by just telling the truth, right? If
Hmm.
there is a truth, right? But what you can do, from what I understand, is understand the nature of disinformation and understand that people will say something that's not true 1,000 times,
Hmm.
right? And there is a very specific method there, and I noticed that, it's like some illegitimate sources will somehow get their information to a so-called legitimate source, and once a legitimate source gets it and reports it, even if it's later proven to be false, it's out there in the ethos, right? And it's out there in people's psyche. So you have to have deliberate campaigns of people, not just me, not just you have to have people out there talking about the truth. And I see in my little bit of social media engagement that's not business, I see more of that now, where people are like, more people saying, that's just not true. Or what's your source for that? Just challenging immediately before it sort of penetrates. People are challenging these things, but it's very difficult. And this is one of the ways that social media is not helpful.
Hmm.
Right, is that it allows it has been a part of people isolating themselves
Hmm.
and isolating themselves physically, isolating themselves. One of the other things that I gave you in statistics when I presented to your group is that more and more people are living alone, and so they're isolated, and so they get into these groups that kind of recruit them
Especially
into.
young men.
Yes. And they become a part of this loneliness epidemic, and people joke about that, but I think it's real. I mean, I know it's real, and I think it's a huge problem for future generations.
Certainly, certainly. Can I ask you a question? I mean,
Sure.
just since we're tapping into this, yeah. I mean, I just like the podcasts I listen to and different content and whatever. I hear a lot about how young men are falling behind, like
Mhm.
living alone, not having
Mhm.
relationships. And again, just total transparency. In my mind, I picture young white men, like video games, in a basement. Is this something that, as far as is happening, like in the Black community, yeah,
It is, for example, like after COVID, college enrollment plummeted at first, and then people started going back into schools. But like, for example, African American males didn't, right? So it's a factor for, I think, all groups, right?
hmm hmm
And it has many, many causes. One of which I think has to do with the fact that males mature and the education system is not aligned with that. Two is the all of us that went to college are encouraging our kids to go to college and not any other options, right? And we're urging them to go immediately. So if they don't do well, which is what happens a lot because they're not ready, is that they end up falling out, and then you it's not just falling out. One client said to me, "I just want her to try it." I said, "No, no, no, no. If she tries it and fails, that undermines her self-confidence. She's already struggling, right?" So, like,
Mhm.
these trials have a cost to them. I think that we're not intervening and have interventions early enough with boys. There's a gentleman that started a school in New York and for African American boys, and he started high school. But then he realized high school's too late. So he had to go back and do middle school. So I think that, and also programs at like the community college level. Like I'm outside of DC in Montgomery County, and there's a Montgomery County college that is, well respected, but they have programs to help boys make it through.
Mhm.
They need more support, more organizational support, and we need to train in more trades and how to be a business person.
I totally agree.
You
I
know,
totally agree.
because look,
Yeah.
your kid may just decide, look, I'm going to be a plumber. And that's not the end result, right? It's that I'm going to
No.
be a plumber. And then I decide in 10 years, well, you know what? After all, I decide I want to do something else. But there should
Sure.
be something for kids who do not want to immediately go to college
Mhm.
and who
Mhm.
aren't
I
they
totally
know they
agree.
aren't ready to go to college.
Mhm.
They know
Mhm.
they're not ready. They know they don't have study habits. So one of my friends just told me this morning, she said her son said, even though he went to a prestigious school, it was kind of easy for him in high school. So when he got to college at a prestigious college, that was a bridge too far. Right. So I just think that there are global reasons why boys are falling behind. I think we parent them differently.
Mhm.
I think, their education system is not there. The social systems are not there. We just
Mhm.
expect them to know what to do. And girls tend to sublimate through achievement.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that not
Mhm.
to say that they don't struggle with stressors and depression also, but they
Yeah.
can, generally, because we're generalizing, they can generally get it done. They can pop the degree off, right? It doesn't mean that they're not struggling, right?
Right.
It's just that it
Right.
shows up differently. But I'm a firm believer that men and women need to gear some of our efforts toward making sure that men can hold their own. Like they're falling behind in terms of college graduations.
Mhm.
And then they're falling behind in terms of graduate degrees.
Right. Right.
And even within trades and things like construction, and women are making gains.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah.
Mhm.
I just have we have one of each, right? I have a son and a daughter. They're both, let's call it 13 and 14, we're in that ballpark. And I just am watching
Time
them
has
so
passed. When I
closely.
first met you, they were little.
They were little. I know. They get big really fast. So tough. But yeah, I'm watching them really closely, especially, our son just around, how engaged is he? Does he feel supported? Does he have friends? Is he hanging out? Is he playing too much video game? I think we got to be aware of this. And to bring it back to the clinical part, this is something that shows up in our assessment
Right,
practices as well. And like
right,
we got to be aware of these contextual factors for how things maybe differ a little bit
right.
generally.
And how diagnostically, which I think we could kind of turn to this area now,
Yeah.
how it comes out in terms of treatment. So you have a young man, he may not be reporting any kind of symptoms that look like a mood disorder whatsoever,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
he's striking out at everybody, he's angry, and to understand that that's the manifestation of depression in youth. Right, to
100%.
understand that as a biological basis for making a distinctive diagnosis, and not just saying, "Well, Jeremy," not me just saying to you, "Well, he's just an adolescent, that they're all angry." No, not to that extent, not that long, not to the fact where he's not doing things that he used to do. So we
Mhm.
need to know about cultures, and being a boy and individuating into a man is a culture. that I
Right.
don't think that we understand, given that we could understand it better.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, do you have thinking about understanding, this is we're circling back, but are there particular frameworks that you like to rely on, like, in the assessment process? Are I know Pamela Hayes, the addressing model, like, this is all, there are ways to kind of approach this whole process. Is there anything that you
You
kind of fall
know,
back on? Are you
I tend to, because I was trained dynamically, that's how I
Mhm,
like frame my discussions, and and it's even how I look at research. But I
mm,
think what like my where and even within that dynamic where I look at sort of an ego psychological frame, their
mhm,
thinking, their emotions and defenses, their relationship to self and understanding of self, and their relationship with others, right?
mhm,
Within that context, I look at culture,
mhm.
right? Like things such as, I'm just going to give you an example because people always say, give me an example when we're talking about
Right.
assessment. And I now, in all my trainings, try to write a paragraph or two so that I can present to people. But like if you wanted to talk about how they relate to people, and you have a
Mhm,
young man who is largely silent and unresponsive in school, right? You could just say, this person has undergone like a lot of rejection from his parents and is dealing with some stressors, like maybe a parent is incarcerated. And so, he's had some run-ins with teachers that, he has perceived to raise some cultural implications, right?
mhm.
And you write about it like that. It's just a matter of fact, 2 or 3 sentences. So this might not excuse, but explain, right? Why he's unresponsive to you as a teacher, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
he's not being rude. He's just not being responsive, right? And so to understand culture means that we want to be on guard for how we're characterizing behavior. Right. And so
Mm,
like in terms of an African American boy, like I had somebody say, he's being rude and this and that. I'm like, well, what's he doing? Right. And well, he's just not talking. So, okay, so he's not talking, he's not participating. I understand that. And I understand that that's not cool. But like, where's the rude? Right. So,
sure. So important.
so to understand that we look at behaviors based on our own internalized biases, right? And that, this kid is not responding because, various things might have happened to him. Again, we're not excusing it. We're trying to explain it to understand the person. And so I am continuing to work on ways through my writings and through writing these book chapters, and I will continue. I know there's an assessment book in me, but when it will come out I don't know, but about ways that we can start to like normalize thinking through that lens of an acceptance that we all have these biases, and that when we're writing that sentence, when we go back over it and we stuck on that word rude, that
Mm,
we can like
example.
think about it and just like and then just holistically telling the story, right? I look at some reports and they don't have anything about the kids' interests. They don't have anything about what they're good at, and like to think,
Get
are
that.
we doing everybody like that?
Mhm,
Right? And
mhm.
again, this is not to call out. This is just so I'm saying these things on this podcast so that people can think, how can I do this better? And you know what? All right, I didn't do that for that. I didn't do that for the gay kids. I do it for everyone else, but I don't, and there's so many tricky and political issues that we're all dealing with right now that, like I have parents, I don't want you to call them by their pronoun in the report. And the kid is like,
Mm,
I insist that you call me by the pronoun in the report.
definitely had that.
So
Yep.
I'm doing a training with Marilyn Montero where we're going to talk about what goes in the report, how we can look at
Okay.
the kid the most holistically, doing that with WPS in September. I think. Uh,
Ooh,
and
look forward
just
to that.
like the most compassionate, holistic report writing that gives you the best reporting that we can do, right? As opposed to just writing down X's, O's, test scores. Who is this kid? Right? What is going on with this kid? Your kid might be like, I might have missed the fact that he had something tragic go on with him when he was younger.
Mhm,
It
mhm,
doesn't, and you take it, let's take it out of race for a second. Like there just
mhm,
might be developmental trauma that is not incorporated. And it's like, how do I write about that? How do I write about it when I know that 150 people are going to see this report? Right? How do I write about it sensitively? How do I write about a person's race in the testing report? Right?
mhm.
I don't put race necessarily in a testing report. And as I say on your Facebook community all the time, reasonable minds can differ. Right. But,
Like,
I don't always put it because sometimes I would be putting it if the person was a minority, and then I would notice I wouldn't put white. And one of the things that I give Jordan Wright a lot of credit for is in the chapter that Tanisha Drummond, Shalina Hurd, and I wrote in his book, Assessing African American Clients. He put a chapter on assessing white clients as his own separate culture, right? And that does two things. One, it legitimizes the fact that that is a legitimate area of study, right?
mhm,
Two,
mhm,
assessing whiteness. And two, it takes the other races out from being the satellite
mhm.
around whiteness, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point. Gosh, there's so much we could dig
I
into
know,
there. I'm so
right?
sad our time is up, Linda. We're getting down to the time. It always goes so fast. My gosh.
But one thing I want to mention is that I did this chapter on assessing Black clients in Jordan Wright's Essential series on
Mhm, mhm,
assessing
mhm.
assessment multicultural populations or something like that. And we'll put the correct book title in there.
Yeah, we'll get that in
And
the
the
show
other
notes.
chapter that I wrote, and I'll quickly speak on, is bipolar. And I wrote the multicultural part of assessing bipolar. And the thing that stuck out with me is how we tend to misdiagnose the one down population. Like we tend to
Mhm,
misdiagnose women, we tend to misdiagnose marginalized populations, and we tend to misdiagnose LGBTQ populations. The implications are stunning because you don't get the right treatment. The treatment is misaligned, the meds are misaligned. It's costly in terms of life trajectory, lifespan.
mhm,
They
mhm.
have people that are misdiagnosed oftentimes have a shorter lifetime. The implications of us getting better at this are enormous in terms of the lives
Right.
of our clients. And so I just wanted to emphasize that chapter on assessing in assessing people with bipolar spectrum disorder, edited by Kleiger and Weiner.
Great. Yeah, and we'll put links to those, at least to the books, and try to get the chapters. Yeah, yeah. I can maybe add a little closing thought too, just to cap that I've been deep in this AI world here over the last couple years, and there, when you dig into the research around misdiagnosis and like bias in AI models, that's a real thing as well, which I think a lot of people are probably aware of. But just to highlight that too, this is something we have to pay a lot of attention to, and I think moving forward, there's a big opportunity to do better, right? And
Absolutely.
well, I'm grateful for you being here as always. And our time flies by. We packed in 17 different topics
Right.
and made them all meaningful. So
Right.
largely on your part. But yeah, people, I think we've talked about the podcast, but what's the best way, if people want to find you and talk to
Yeah.
you and listen to you?
Well, you can find me at the multiculturalpsychologist.com. And it has its own website. You can sign up to get notifications of issues. You can figure out how to get CEUs from Society of Personality Assessment, my sponsor, and all kinds of things. I'm all over the web. I have a speaker page, a practice page, and it's under
Mm,
Linda McGhee. So you can find me easily and just reach out to me.
Nice. Nice. That sounds great. Well, thanks for being here as always, and
Thank you,
look
Jeremy, for
forward to the
having
next time that
me.
we chat. Take care.
Mhm.